Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about how I clean raw data in SPSS. So normally you get this from like a Qualtrics survey, you've run your survey online, then you download your data and this is what you get. And you have to clean this all up and calculate your constructs in order to do your analysis in SPSS. And so when I'm cleaning data, I essentially follow these 9 steps. So I delete any unnecessary columns or stuff that I don't need. I have to name my variables. Then I go through a process of deleting participants for various reasons. These are participants or cases that I can't use because, for example, they haven't consented to the study or they've provided no data, like they've clicked on the survey link but there's nothing there. Then I have to calculate my constructs, which involves reverse coding any relevant items and coding demographics if needed. So let's go back to the raw data set here. So Qualtrics gives you a bunch of this stuff that you don't need. For some of this stuff like duration, this is how many seconds it took for the participant to complete your survey. If it's like super short amount of time, then they were paying attention. They were just essentially clicking through. So that's a reason why you might delete participants, but I've actually already done that in the online platform I use to analyze this data. So I'm just going to take all of this out. The next thing I need to do is name my variables. There is a way to kind of do this in Qualtrics, but I just do it after the fact because it's easier for me. But you have to name, all your demographics. So age, gender, race, and so on. So you do that for your demographic variables, and then you have to also do it for your scales. And so I've prepared a scale down here, which is mental health. So here's how it came in with Q28 and so on. So I normally will name these mental health 1, mental health 2, mental health 3, 4, and 5. So I'll go and do that for all my scales so that this is really helpful. For example, if you're doing structural equation modeling later or whatever, you really need to have quick access and understand what your actual items are named. Okay, so if we go back to my slide here, the next thing is to start deleting participants. So the first is those who didn't consent to the study. So my first variable here is consent. So I sort ascending. This is just a preview. You can see there's no data, so I'm just going to take that out. But for whatever reason, these 17 people didn't consent. They said no. So if we look at the consent variable values, 1 is no and 2 is yes. So they probably clicked this accidentally because they completed the whole survey. Why do that? And I'll mention here, just as sort of a break, I deleted a bunch of variables that could be identifying to participants. So their ID with the online platform, their jobs and things like that. So that this is completely de-identified. Okay, so I'm going to take these 17 people out, and then I have to have a little note document where I say, 17 no consent. So I'm keeping track of how many I'm deleting for various purposes that I'll report on my manuscript. Okay, so if we look back at the slide here, the next thing we have to do is delete participants who provided no data at all. So there's a couple ways to do this. So first of all, I will sort ascending on age. And so we have all of these cases with absolutely no data. Now, probably what happened with this is these are previews or just people clicking. So I'm going to remove these and I'll make a note of it, but I don't always report that in the manuscript itself. But I'll make a note of deleting those people. The next thing are people who completed demographic information but haven't given you any scale information. So this is my final demographic variable. So I'm going to sort ascending on the scales themselves. Now you can see most people provided at least some data. Sometimes you'll get a case where people have just completed basically nothing. So this is my final demographic variable. So this is where my scale starts. So if I sort ascending here, we're going to see this much more clearly. So these 13 people, they completed some scales. It looks like everyone completed at least one scale, so I'm going to leave them in. But if this was a case where there was someone who completed absolutely nothing, like there might be this person. Let's see. Yeah, this person is a good example. So they've completed absolutely no data. So I'm just going to take all of these people out because I can't do any analysis with what they provided. So I just say 1, there's probably some more in there, but I won't sort of waste time looking through all those with you all. So 1 only demos. So we'll take those folks out. All right, and so if we look, we've deleted those, and now we do step 6, delete participants who incorrectly selected validity items. And so what we do when we're collecting online data, and there's some kind of financial incentive, so whether that's on an online collection platform, or you're doing like a raffle with gift cards or whatever, there's financial incentive. So you want to just make sure that your participants are carefully answering questions and paying attention to what they say. So here's an example. This one says, please select neutral for this item. So I'm going to select that one. And here I have another one. And then I should have one more right here. So I've selected them all. And I'm just going to drag them to the bottom. So these aren't part of the scales, of course. They have to select neutral. So in this case, they have to select 4 in order to have sort of the correct answer. So what I normally do is I'll label these valid 1, valid 2, and valid 3. So then I go to these. And so you can see clearly the correct answers are 4, 5, 4. And there's a couple of people in here who did not respond correctly. So what I do is I go in and I recode into same variable. And just a pro tip, you can always right click and then say display variable names, and it's much easier to read. And so 1 and 3, the correct response was 4. So we're going to put these in, and we're going to say 4 is 1, you got it correct, and 0 will be essentially incorrect. And then if there's any sort of missing data, system or user missing, then we set those to missing. Essentially, you want to put that in because otherwise it's going to put, because what we're going to say here is we're going to say all other values are wrong, 0. But if it's missing, we want to just keep it missing. We don't want it to give it a 0 because it doesn't mean that they got it wrong. It just means that they didn't complete that scale for whatever reason. And so you'll see what happens here on the left. It turns all into 1s and 0s. So 0 is incorrect and 1 is correct. And so now we have to do our valid 2 variable that we just created. But 5 is the correct answer. And we're going to run this. Okay. Now we're going to create a new validity variable. And we're just going to add these up. Oh, just got a space in there. Okay, so for these folks, basically anything but so 3, people got all 3 correct, they're good to go, right? They're good to use. But people who got less than that, we want to remove. So I'm going to sort ascending. I'm not going to worry about the people, these folks who are just missing. But these folks, so for example, this person, they missed 2 of these validity check items. And this person 2 down missed 1. So generally what I decide to do is I just remove all the people who didn't get them all correct, because generally it's a small enough number that it's not a major concern. So in this case, this is 13 people. So I'm going to put that on my document here, 13 validity. All right, so let's go back here. So we've deleted everyone we need to delete. Now we need to reverse code items. So if I go to my data set here, I've set up my little, my sample, my mental health. So if you see this is mental health. So higher scores should refer to greater mental health. So when you say, how much of the time were you a happy person? Higher is more happy. But you can see these 3 items are nervous, downhearted, down in the dumps. So these are going in the opposite direction. So I need to recode these so that higher scores mean greater mental health. And if we look here, there are 6 sort of scale points. So what we're going to do is transform into same variables. And then we're going to find the mental health. And this is why it's helpful to name these appropriately, right? Because I can identify them really quickly. And so how I reverse code is I say, if the value is 1, I want it to be 6. If it's 2, I want it to be 5. If it's 3, I want it to be 4. If it's 4, 3, 5, 2, and 6, 1. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good to go. And so that will reverse code all of these scales by switching the items appropriately. And if you just want to quickly double check if you've done this correct, you can go to correlations, put your 5 items in, and take a look at the correlations. You can see they're all positive. There's no negative correlations. So that means we coded them all correctly in the right direction. We can also look at scale reliability analysis. Put all of those in. The Cronbach's alpha is 0.91, which means they're all going in the same direction. They're all good. So we have no concerns. We did this correctly. So going back to our list here, we've reverse coded those items. Now, obviously, you're going to go through the entire data set and reverse code every item that you need to reverse code. But I'm not going to take you through all that for this data, just to keep things straightforward and simple. And so the next thing you do is calculate constructs. So you just go compute variable, and we're going to call it mental health. Now, I'll just give you a pro tip. I see a lot of people putting the acronyms of scales as their variable that they're creating. This is pretty confusing, especially if you're providing the data to someone else who's doing the analyses, or you come back to it after a while. You don't really remember the acronyms of scales, but you remember, oh yeah, I measured mental health. This is the construct in this data set. So I really recommend doing it that way. And that goes for like when you create tables and things like that. Just call the constructs what they are instead of using acronyms. So we've calculated our mental health variable, and we'll look at the end here, and there it is. And so what I do is when I calculate all of my variables, I put them all at the end of the data set so I can access them really quickly. Sometimes I see people embedding their constructs within sort of everything here. But that gets pretty confusing. So I just put them all at the end so that I can use this in an analysis. So the only thing left to do, if relevant, is to recode any of your demographic variables. So I generally leave gender and race and other variables like that open-ended. I try not to give participants the categories that they should confine to. I just open it up and say, hey, define yourself however you want. And so what I will often do then is I'll go back, and you see people are putting F for female or woman. And so I assign that a value of whatever. So like 0, for example. And an easy way to do that is you just copy a 0. And then for all the people who put female, for example, you just paste a 0. And then in gender here, you just make sure to keep track of that. So you have, 0 is woman, and so on and so forth. And then you could eventually switch it from string to numeric. So if you plan on using gender in your analyses, or if you just want a simple way to get frequency distributions, I do that. Obviously, some people just, put in a forced choice answer, but like I said, I try not to do that. So that's pretty much it. I would go through and I would do that for the entire data set and each of these variables, and then I would be all ready to analyze my data. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions, but that's pretty much how I clean raw SPS data. Have a good one.